Afternoon, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. My guest is Dr. Scott Lively. Scott was a candidate for governor of my own home state of Massachusetts a while back. He is the co-author of The Pink Swastika. He's a minister out of Springfield a while back. And Scott, you're starting now getting involved in a YouTube channel, and you're beginning to talk about kind of an international movement, which interests me. Talk a bit about that. What is going on with your vision of a Bible-based international movement that brings people together of like mind?
Well, I've been fighting the culture war for 30 years, and most of that time I've been on the front lines, and I've been to 63 countries, written a number of books. Really have my entire life, adult life, has been focused on this goal. And what I see that the greatest failure has been that we have not unified the people of the world on the basics of universal values, the natural law perspective, as the broadest as our broadest base, and that's especially evident in Christianity, where we're divided into all these very diverse and often conflicted factions. And I want to pursue sort of post-denominational unity on the essentials of the faith, and work together to stand against the sort of the humanist juggernaut that's stripping us of our of what the founding fathers established for us here in the United States.
Okay, so how would you define natural law, and what are some of these basic fundamental principles that we can find unity on, even if we may disagree with each other on various sectarian questions and specifics? Where can we find unity? What is the natural law as you define it?
Well, for me, it comes down to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, that's the most truth that we share with the vast majority of the people of the earth. Now, maybe not American citizens who have all been conditioned according to a materialistic, humanistic worldview, but around the world, anyone who hasn't been trained in something different recognizes, even as a child, the basics of the created order. You know, that we're designed as male and female. Families are formed naturally. Communities are formed naturally by families. Those things are universals, and yet we don't really emphasize those at all when we're dealing with public policy.
So then, what I gather here is that you're saying that the biblical admonition, which exists, as you point out in Genesis 1:1, is that God, as opposed to man, created the universe. God is the creator. God is the king of the universe, and God, thus, is an extension of the Bible, is the lawgiver. It's the origin of the, as the Greeks say, logos or nomos of the universe. And that it is a balance between a belief in the creator of the universe and an understanding or an attempt to perceive the nature of God's laws that creates natural law, that creates a moral society.
Yeah, well, if you look at the issues that we are having the greatest challenge with, especially in the Western world, they all come down to the definition of what it means to be a human being, right? How we're supposed to act in terms of the most basic of human behaviors, sexuality, and family relationships, and that even though the vast majority of the people of the world all agree on that we are the creation of God and that there is a natural order to things, our majority opinion doesn't seem to matter at all, and we don't really try to assert it or defend it. We are, but if we did, if here in the United States, if we reached out to all the people who share that worldview, then we would outnumber those who are trying to to change society. But instead, the globalists have us sort of polarized in these warring camps over uh, important things or important issues, but they're not the foundational issues that we could if we had unity on those basic things. Most of the social problems that we're fighting about or that we're concerned about would really be solved.
I mean, your comments bring up a lot of thoughts for me. I mean, to discuss a current issue, you talk about the globalists dividing us up by creating false differences, and I think that's what they're trying to do now in this country and in much of the rest of the world, in response to what I see as a natural movement and as a reassertion of the values you're talking about and of individual sovereignty under God. And that is euphemistically called a nationalist movement or a populist movement. And in this country, I would argue that that is represented by the election of Donald Trump, and that the globalists are trying to divide us with artificial conflicts, like they want us to get into, or they want to label us as having something against people based on race and whatnot. When these are lies, I mean, it's really an attempt to weaken this emerging movement, which is it includes all in the case of the United States, it includes all Americans. The idea of reasserting our national sovereignty, of putting our own lives first and our own destinies, and being able to determine the nature of that based upon an understanding of what is right. And I will also mention something very specific that I find interesting in terms of this, and that is that about maybe several months ago, I attended an event at my synagogue here in Boston, which included a talk by a very notorious gay rabbi, Rabbi Greenberg. He's written a book. He's out there, and a lot of the people who came to hear him speak were gay or were advocates of gay rights and who were expecting like him to come up and give a fiery speech about the virtues of being gay, when in fact he did not do that. And that's why I don't think he's been heard from since. What he said was that, putting aside the question of whether or not a person has a right to be gay, the fact is that homosexual activity is not a virtue, and the Torah does not view it as holy. Wow. In fact, it views it as, I was quite astonished. It's seen as a fall from holiness. That doesn't mean you can't, you have to ban it, but you can't condone it. And it's not something that, and in a sense, the Torah says that, it uses the word toavi, which is, it's been misinterpreted in the New Testament to be an abomination. That's not the Hebrew meaning. The Hebrew meaning is unholy. It's a fall away from proper holy conduct. And he was saying, look, I'm not here to say you can't have this and you can't engage in it, but I'm here to point out that let's not pretend that this is something that it brings us closer to God. It brings us away from God. It's your choice.
That's quite.
I mean, I was, and the audience looked absolutely crestfallen. Oh my God! I mean, people were like, they were shocked. And and as I said, he has not been heard from since. This is about a year ago, actually, when I heard him speak on Shavuos. And to me, that's and I recently was watching Milo Yiannopoulos, who is an openly gay conservative talk show host on YouTube, and he was talking about this guy who is part of Turning Point USA, which is presenting itself as conservative, but it includes a open homosexual as part of their presentation. And he said the same thing. He said, look, I'm not going to deny that I'm gay, but I'm not going to pretend that this is something that's a virtue. It's just part of what I'm doing, but it's part of what I'm about, but it's not something that I'm going to tout up on the flagpole and say, this is great. This is it's not great. But I mean, I recognize people have a right to it. But let's
Well,
not, as a society,
I
pretend
think
that this is. Yeah.
yeah, I think there's hope for people who acknowledge that what they're doing is sin, right? The real
Right.
problem comes when you declare that God is and you're right, and that you're going to continue to do something because because you're the one who's right and not him. That's where you really run into
Yeah.
problems, theologically, spiritually.
Well, that's where
Um,
you end
I,
up. That's where the
I
satanic idea
recognize
comes in.
that people struggle with uh, sexual inclinations. I call it same-sex attraction disorder, right? I've
Right.
adopted and I think that's what it is. It's same-sex attraction disorder. And if you acknowledge that it's a disorder, even if you struggle with it, then at least you're being like that there's even room as a Christian. I believe that you can be a Christian and struggle with behavior that's beyond your ability to control at the moment, as long as you acknowledge that it's not what God wants for you.
Yeah. I mean, look. I mean, we have a right. Part of freedom is
So
the
you're
right to
you're
sin, but yet let's not pretend that sin is a virtue. We should identify it as such, and if we choose it, then we do so at our own personal and spiritual risk. And let's
right.
not
And
advocate it. Let's try to reduce it. So, to me, this is a movement. What you're talking about, I think, is a movement that is even entering into some
you're
of the
kind of
circles.
breaking up a little bit on my end. I'm going to
Yeah,
try to.
a little bit there. All right, Scott, no problem.
I'm going to
Um,
switch my.
okay,
I'm going to tether my computer to my phone.
all right, very good.
See if
Um,
that helps any. I
see if
don't know
that
if it's you
improves.
or if it's me, but
No, I think it is coming from your end. I mean, because I did an interview earlier and there was no problem. So um, let's see if that's an improvement. Say something now. Let's see how it goes.
switch.
Okay.
All right, now it should be. I have a stronger signal through my phone than I.
It's a little bit better, but I would suggest that you work on it. I mean, when I started doing the show, I had to get an upgrade on my laptop, and I got like an external mic and an external webcam. So not a big investment, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
wanted to improve my audio, and some of my earlier shows, I got a lot of complaints, rightfully, because it was not good. But anyhow, so you are, as a YouTube host, you're spearheading an effort to bring people together who understand these concepts. We started by talking about the most basic of all, which is that God created the universe, not
Lost the
man.
connection.
Are you there? All right. We're having some technical problems here,
No,
Scott.
I actually thought it switched over to the other connection and it didn't. So let me
No,
close
this is
the.
better. This is better. You're sounding better now. I think, or maybe not.
Okay, here we
Um,
go. Now, this one should be better. This should be better right now. Can you hear me?
okay. Yeah, I do.
Yeah. I thought I had disconnected from the router, but I hadn't. Anyway,
Oh,
go ahead
okay.
and ask what's your
Yeah.
point again?
Anyway, so we started by talking about the most basic and fundamental element of the Bible, of the Torah, that we agree on, which is that the Lord God, King of the universe, created the world and created the law, created order, created, logos, as my good friend Dr. E. Michael Jones calls it in his new book, Rising Logos, which is it's a brilliant mind. I totally disagree with him on his view on Jews, but putting that aside. Um, but yes, logos is all about the creation of the universe, the creation of order of the universe. This is what I would argue Judaism and Christianity share in terms of an understanding of God's order, and of trying to measure our lives to that, live by that as best we can.
Well,
We also recognize and identify sin, because that is the satanic influence. And while we recognize that people are going to sin, we all are, and that people have a right to it to an extent that doesn't hurt anyone, let's not come out and give it the good housekeeping seal of approval. Let's recognize what it is for what it is, and that while we have freedoms, we all have a common interest in supporting and endorsing and promoting virtue.
Well, and I would expand it further. One thing that when I went to Kyrgyzstan, in 2017 to assist in their effort to amend their constitution to defend and define marriages between a man and a woman. Mm-hmm. And I thought the people that invited me there were Russian Orthodox Christians. But when I actually got there, was picked up at the airport, my wife and I were picked up by our host. We turned out he was a Muslim.
Right.
But he was a pro-Christian Muslim who himself emphasizes sort of the focus on universal values. So while I was there, together we launched what we call the Natural Life Movement, a set of 7 principles, universal principles that are sort of built around a natural order concept. And I published that at scottlively.net. If you go there, you can actually read the document about that. But so a Christian from the United States and a Muslim from Central Asia unified on a set of basic principles that I think 90% of the citizens of the world would agree with. And then subsequently, I also noticed that a few years ago in England, there was a group of Hindus that tried to start a natural law party, so that even Hindus who don't even share our sort of creationist premise, they recognize the natural law from their own observations, and that further broadens the platform by which we could set things in order, right? If we all cooperated together to get back to recognizing the primacy of the natural family and the importance of the preservation of that as the heart of mainstream society, having tolerance for people who decide to live outside the mainstream, right? But not letting them redefine the mainstream according to their selfish interests.
Right. I mean, that's sort of what we're talking about here. And, in a sense, it's very interesting that you're spearheading this movement all over the world. The movement includes, as in your case, the main emphasis is on furthering the traditional family as the most developed and most appropriate means by which we can move forward. And I think it is. It is obviously something that it's the one unit of man that has furthered sovereignty and progress over time. It's not something that, it's something that took many, many millennia to develop. I actually think that the ancient Romans have a lot of credit for this, developing the monogamous marriage as opposed to in a move away from polygamy. And that it's something that we ought to be promoting and cherishing and supporting, because it is the most sovereign unit, and thus it's under attack. Now, the forces that are arrayed against us are defined by former communist spy Whittaker Chambers in his book Witness, which is an extraordinary book. And he writes in his first chapter, Letters to My Children, that the communist movement, and he had been a Soviet communist in the 1930s. He handled communists inside of the Roosevelt administration. These were, real people. They were colluding with Russia. This isn't some phony conspiracy theory.
It was real collusion.
Yeah, I mean, the president is a spy, for Russia, which is this whole crap, cockamamie thing. These people were. Now, Roosevelt wasn't, but these people inside his administration were, clearly. And he defined communism as the world's second oldest religion. And that he said it was birthed at the Garden of Eden, when the serpent, representing Satan, told Eve, who then entered into a conspiracy with Adam, the world's first conspiracy, that you can be like gods. You can know everything. You can know good and evil. In other words, you, the mortal man, the mortal woman, together can overthrow God in heaven you can create the universe. You will be on the top.
Yeah.
And it was that moment that communism was born, because that's what we're struggling with. And we have struggled with it in every generation from that time till today. And that is this conflict between God and man. Is God the center of the universe with immutable laws that transcend human frailty and human imperfection? Or do we have a clique of men who seek to overthrow God and replace God with themselves as the enlightened ones, as the gods who are trying to transform us into some kind of a different, perfected being, whatever that might be? And that's something that is in their image, and they don't even know what that is, as opposed to what is in God's image, and that is the man and the woman.
Well, I think this is the way that I sort of summarize uh, Marxism, uh, and it's that Marxism is a comprehensive alternative to the biblical worldview that rests upon the Darwinian evolutionist concept of random chance, uh, and that manifests in this. It holds the belief that humanity is evolving naturally and inexorably toward a utopian society that's a global socialist order, but that the Judeo-Christian worldview stands in the way. And so that in order to achieve this faster, they destroy the Judeo-Christian order so they can build the utopia on the ashes. That's always been the essence of it. Now, there are four forms: communism, socialism, fascism, and cultural Marxism, which is really secular humanism,
Mm-hmm.
the religious form of Marxism, and that the first three used economic tactics to subvert the culture, which never worked because the people, the fabric of society, rooted in the family, always had a basis for resisting totalitarianism. And so they always overthrew the Marxist order until Herbert Marcuse in the 1930s came out with cultural Marxism, which really adapted the strategy of Balaam that he taught to Balak.
Mm-hmm.
Get the people to corrupt and defile themselves through sexual perversion, and they will disintegrate themselves. And that's when the sexual revolution, or the concept of it,
Mm-hmm.
was born, and that's become the primary tool of the globalists to take down Judeo-Christian order. And that's the fight that we're in. And it all comes down to using sexuality to break up the family fabric to make nations more susceptible to control by this globalist elite.
No, I mean I think Marcuse was the Pied Piper of the sexual revolution. He's came from the so-called Frankfurt School,
Mm-hmm.
which operated out of Columbia University, and they had a lot of people come out with all kinds of charming ideas, like that the middle class is secretly fascist, and it was an attack on America. It was an attack on Western civilization, all couched in this pseudo-academic jargon that is often we listen to that stuff and we think, oh, these people must be really smart, you know, right?
Yeah, when you
They
speak
really
in
know what they're
jargon, it
talking about.
always sounds that way, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, and they took this kind of high ground authoritarian language, and they did do a lot to transform society away from the basic position of belief in God and country and family.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know, I mean,
he was really
yeah,
the precursor to Saul Alinsky, right? Marcuse
sure.
came first, and Alinsky really sort of popularized and created a workable model for agitation that then was adopted by the Clintons and many others, and has been used very successfully to sort of dismantle our Judeo-Christian infrastructure here in the United States of America. That's what
Oh,
we're fighting
absolutely.
against here.
And my good friend Dr. E. Michael Jones talks about this in his brilliant book Libido Dominandi, where he shows that the promotion of sexuality and unrestraint is a form of slavery. It's a form of kind of pulling the rug out of the strong individual. Of course, he blames the Jews, which is not, I reject that. That's bad news. Unfortunately, it's like painting a mustache on the Mona Lisa, really, because he is so brilliant, and yet he kind of veers into this stuff.
Well,
But
the people that are responsible for producing this, many cases are ethnic Jews, but they're
sure,
not really Jews because they're
well,
atheists.
there was rebellion against Judaism in the
Right.
same way that you have Christians who are promoting a rebellion against Christianity.
Yeah. Now
We're on the same side if we're believers in the Torah.
well, look, this is my perspective, and I do a lot of debate with the anti-Zionists, and the point that I'm always trying to make to them is that that Semitism, right, where they get the anti-Semitism from, is all about identification with Shem and Yahweh worship, right? That's what it's about. And that so to be anti-Semitic isn't to be against atheistic ethnic Jews. It's to be against those who identify with Shem as identified in the Talmud as Melchizedek, really,
Right. Sure.
and that so those who have abandoned the Torah, they may still be ethnic Hebrews, but they've abandoned the Torah. They have no claim to Semitism. They have no claim.
Well, they were in rebellion against God, and they were in rebellion against the covenant between God and the children of Israel. So yes, I agree with that. I mean, they're still Jewish, but they're not. They're part of. I mean, I've gotten into this in on other shows about the conspiracy around the false Messiah, Shabtai Zvi, and how that corrupted much of Judaism, and it's continued to do so. But you talk about, Scott, about kind of commonalities of values among peoples of the world who believe in the virtues of the Torah, the belief that creator of the universe, natural law. And I really think that is the best way forward, because we're all confronting the same enemies who are trying to overthrow the natural law, who are trying to replace the natural law with their own whim-based understanding of what they think is best, and they don't even know what they think.
Unnatural law. It's an artificial. Yeah. It's an artificial creation that contradicts the basic realities of what it means to be a human being. Like this whole transgenderism phenomenon that's occurring right now. If you actually look and see what these people have been doing through the stages of the culture war, they've been systematically dismantling God's order from the furthest reaches, first by attacking the sanctity of marriage, then by attacking the idea that you need that sex belongs between a man and a woman, and now that human identity is even male and female. It's
right.
They're
denying the existence of the difference between men and women, which is a big no-no in the Torah. I mean, it's it's completely it's contradicting science, and it's contradicting reality.
But then the next step after that. So if that's the trajectory they've been following, the next step is they're pursuing the breakdown of the order between the kinds. And that's what transhumanism is. Transhumanism is the blending of humans and animals and machines. That's the ultimate.
Something, you're onto something here, because this is something that is the unspoken aspect of the Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy. He was into this at MIT. That's one of the reasons why MIT is now trying to fix their image, and that you can see this on websites connected to MIT, this transhumanism. I've interviewed people involved with that, and that, they believe that it's based on the Darwinian idea of an evolution of the species, which is something that we can debunk. But putting that aside, they think that they can evolve man into a new being, into a superior species. It's very Nazi. Oh, yeah. It's very much like the Ubermensch. If you combine, and by the way, I mean, I think it's a good thing to come up with modalities that improve our health, and help us live longer. I mean, that's normal.
Right. Anything that augments the natural order is beneficial.
For sure.
Anything that supplants the natural order is malignant. And that we need to be very, very careful about what's happening in this development of transhumanism. And it comes down to, this is the central doctrine of humanism is human self-perfectibility, right?
Mhm.
That's really what it all comes down to, is that it's human beings, we have dethroned God, and we have put ourselves on the throne as little g gods of human self-perfectibility, and that we're going to create our own better version of ourselves through technology. That's really what this is all about. And
Exactly.
then we'll destroy everything in that process.
Oh, and it's very cult-like. I mean, I've interviewed people involved in this, and they come on like with the glassy eyes, like, oh, they're looking at the future. And it was a lot of it was started at MIT by Ray Kurzweil, who was a brilliant scientist. He, in the 1980s, invented the talking book, which is, he did it for Stevie Wonder. You put a book in and it reads it for you.
Okay.
But then he kind of started to go off the deep end with this stuff about this new bionics and this epigenetics, and we're going to implant computer chips into people so they can monitor all aspects of their health and their brain and their thinking and their consciousness. And they're talking about creating like a Superman. It's kind of like the Ubermensch, with a perfect.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, I mean, like perfect cosmic consciousness. They can live to be 200.
This is Nietzscheism being implemented before our eyes. And what they're merging the three sciences of genetics, robotics, and artificial intelligence. And they're essentially, as they grow and develop as in terms of technological sophistication, they're being integrated together at the same time. And so the idea is that they're going to produce a superior form of humanity that's no longer Homo sapien. It's going to be something else. And we will be our own gods with the power to create new life. And that's the attack on the tree of life itself. So we've now gone back to the most fundamental of the steps of creation in that process. There's nothing left after that. Once you take away the barrier between the kinds, there's nothing left, right?
That's right. Everything becomes an amorphous. I mean, it's the ultimate blurring of the borders, and the Torah is filled with borders. Yeah. God separates the profane from the holy. He separates, the nations at the Tower of Babel. He separates his very defined separations, and the Talmud gets into, I think, almost too intricate a, detail on this. They separate the top of a pin. However, the intention is to try to understand, I think, the Torah and what it means and how to live with it, especially when you're in diaspora in that case. But getting back to the transhumanism, I mean, in some cases, we are talking about good science here. The problem is it's in the hands of people who don't have the right intentions. Like, for example, the genomic map. I don't know if you know about this, but it's basically an ability to take a look at the human genome so we can determine if a person has a potential to get various diseases or maladies. There's nothing wrong with that on the surface,
science doesn't kill people.
Enter that into a data bank for the government to run it, and then they can decide things like whether you're going to be allowed to have children, whether or not you're going to be allowed to be married. I mean, there was actually something about this on 60 Minutes the other night where they showed this Harvard scientist, a brilliant man, but yet you could see that, they're moving us in the direction of this idea that we can create this perfect health and by understanding your genome. And, you're going to give up your sovereignty. They're going to basically, if you have some propensity for disease, you're going to be killed off.
Science fiction has really painted the picture of where we're going with this. Science fiction is always sort of a substantial part of science fiction has always been looking slightly ahead in
it's a projection. Yep.
Yeah, and but now it's catching up very rapidly, and what is our response? Our response should be to challenge everyone to conserve the natural order. The conservation movement right? This is where I believe that we can even ally with a portion of the progressive movement that's based in environmentalism. The
Right.
environmentalists share a natural law perspective that even they should be able to be drawn into a coalition in defense of the natural order. And we should be doing that immediately and as vigorously as possible.
Right. Environmentalism, but also localism. And,
Right.
the idea that, we want to retain, local sovereignty over our lives as much as possible. And I mean, this is a
Right.
movement that I'm a supporter of. And I tend to be a bit on the green side when it comes to the
No,
environment.
I am too. I'm
Yeah.
very much aligned with you on that. And as a matter of fact, I'll tell you, um, all this whole thing that the natural life movement really began when I was in Santa Rosa and I was the Eagle Forum state director there. Was a Mormon lady,
Yeah.
and she was trying to stop Diversity Day from being expanded to Diversity Week at Santa Rosa High School. And so she organized a bunch of parents to go into the school for the day, and I joined them. And then she set up this evening event where Scott Lively is going to sort of give the history of the LGBT movement to the community, right? The history and the tactics and strategy. But when we got to the room, the gays and the hard left had taken over the meeting
Mhm.
facility, and all the seats were filled with high school kids and college kids and the purple hair people. And so I walked in and I just, my heart kind of sunk. And I thought, Lord, what can I do to make a connection? And then instantly in my mind, I got up and I said, look, I think I assume that most people in this room are environmentalists. Well, I am too. And the thing that we hold in common is environmentalism has a natural law perspective that when you are concepts like biodiversity and ecosystems, they assume a natural order that needs to be preserved to protect plants and animals. I'm
Right.
just asking you to expand your mind a little bit to recognize that humanity has its own ecosystem called the natural family. And if you take the mom or the dad out of the family, you're going to have same problems if you cut down half the rainforest. And when I said that, this kid in the third row, college kid, he's like this. He's going, oh, and I knew that was it.
You hit the nail. Yeah.
And from
And
then, I
also just
developed
to,
that idea. That's what the natural life movement has come down to, is developed from. Is that
yeah.
that?
And also with the natural rights, I mean, just to follow up a little bit on the genomic map, I think that it's safe to say that we also support life. And that if you have a genomic map telling you who's going to live and who's going to die,
Right.
and Obamacare, which gives you a Corey score to decide whether or not you get health care, every moment we have a moral obligation to help people live as long as possible. And if someone might have a genetic, abnormality, that person can contribute enormously to society. I mean, you can have
If they're
can you
conceived,
imagine, like, they're going to abort someone who might be mildly retarded and this kind of thing? How immoral is that? That person could grow up and become like Mozart, playing
now if
piano or something. I mean, it's
yeah,
just,
I agree. I
it's,
agree. Now, if you were talking about editing uh, chromosomes or something in the egg or the sperm, that would be one thing, right?
right,
Because then you're dealing with potential life and not actual life. But when you're messing around with a created being that's already growing, that's whose DNA is already established and will never change over the course of the entire progression of his life, that's a completely different phenomenon. That's really is murder. When
oh
you're
yeah, I mean, they're
destroying.
actually encouraging people to have abortions if they have if the fetus isn't perfect. And this is something that's going on. I mean,
Yeah.
this is like,
Well, it's
that's
already
the
doing
first.
that sort of thing.
Yeah,
They do
I mean,
that now. They do that out as a matter of
oh, they
course.
do. Oh, I mean,
Why?
even
Yeah.
they wanted, when my wife and I, my wife was pregnant. We were like, we don't want to know.
Yeah.
We're having a baby.
We'll
I mean,
take whatever we get and be happy.
yeah.
Right.
I mean, this is insane. What
Yeah.
the heck? Anyway, so Scott, this is a great talk. I'd like to do more of them with you. It's really very interesting. We're getting onto some good stuff here. But I don't want to go too long. So let my listeners and viewers know how they can reach you, where they can go to watch your YouTube channel and whatever other information you want to impart?
Well, my hub is scottlively.net. And if you go there, you can contact me. My email. There are some of my current videos are there. You can go right to the YouTube channel from those links. But the best place is to connect with me through email through scottlively.net. And I communicate, I correspond with people all over the world on a regular basis, and I love talking these kinds of issues
Good.
with anybody. So,
All right, Scott, listen, thanks so much for joining me this afternoon.
thanks, Chuck. God bless you.
Thank you. Same to you, and talk to you soon.